Writers, these 7 things are a really helpful way to wake up your creativity and just make sure that you have a good writing day. You don't have to do all 7 of these, but all of them are things that famous authors have done and things that I find personally to be helpful in my own creative writing routine. So let's get started with number 1, perform your routine. So what's most important is not exactly what you do, but that you do the exact same thing every single morning, because creativity thrives on routine. So let's give some examples of this. For instance, meditation. I used to meditate for 5 minutes every single morning before I started writing. And it really was a great way to calm down my brain and prepare myself for the act of engaging with the page. Another really helpful routine is simply taking a walk, a short walk. Dickens often took walks throughout London. Thoreau was said to walk for at least 4 miles a day. And Nietzsche said all great thoughts are conceived while walking. So walking can just be a great chance to let your mind prepare for the scenes that you're about to write. Another great routine comes from my friend Sarah the Barge, who wrote the book Invisible Girls. What she does every single day before she writes is she jumps on her bed or a mini trampoline. No, she is not 5 years old. What she's trying to do is just summon up this kind of energy to get ready for tackling the page. And lastly, let's just look at the Japanese author Haruki Murakami and what he does for a routine. First thing he does is he wakes up at 4 a.m., then he writes for 5 to 6 hours, then he either runs a 10K or swims 1,500 meters, and then he reads or he listens to music, specifically jazz, because he used to own a jazz bar. And what Murakami says is he says the repetition itself becomes the important thing. Writers, you're just basically choosing a habit, which is going to automatically usher you from doing whatever that thing is straight to the act of writing. A second thing that writers should do in the morning before they start writing is deliver a pep talk to yourself. Now, I'm not asking you to go full high school football coach and deliver this impassioned whole speech. I'm just asking for a single line that you might repeat to yourself before you begin the act of writing. And let me give you 5 types of things you could say to yourself. One might be aspirational. Octavia Butler, who wrote many famous novels, including Parable of the Sower, used to write a single line in her journal: I shall be a best-selling author. That really let her verbalize her desire before she got into the writing process. She knew what she was aiming towards. A second example might just be permission. Anne Lamott, in her book for writers called Bird by Bird, says that before she begins writing, she tells herself, I am not going to show this to anyone. What that does is it gives her an enormous amount of freedom. It takes all the pressure off of her. So she's not thinking what so-and-so is going to say about it and what so-and-so is going to say about it. She's only thinking, this is for me. Another one that I find particularly helpful is just to say to yourself, I don't have to write a lot today. Just like the Anne Lamott example, that takes all the pressure off of you and just allows you to have fun on the page. A third thing that you can do is to use a counterintuitive pep talk. At the end of The Linchpin Writer, which is my nonfiction book designed to help writers write their novel, I revealed that I frequently say a counterintuitive phrase to myself. It's actually a quote from Gandhi. Whatever you do today will be insignificant, but it is very important that you do it. So the first half of that is not very encouraging at all. What do you mean my writing today is going to be insignificant? But what that does is it releases the pressure on you. You can just sit down and say, okay, I'm gonna do the work I have to do because it is very important that I do this small thing. And I think the same thing about this YouTube video. It's probably not gonna get 1 million views, but it is a very small thing that I can do to help you folks write a better book. A fourth thing you could say to yourself is just some simple encouragement. Say, I am a good writer. 3 times to yourself. Quite often for writers, there's a lot of negative self-talk ricocheting around our brains. Stuff like, you should not be writing, or this book is going to be terrible. And so you're trying to just counteract that a little bit and say to yourself, like, I can write this book. I am a good writer. And lastly, a 5th strategy you can use for something to say to yourself is just focus on pleasure. Say to yourself, today, I'm gonna have fun. You don't say, today I'm gonna write 7,000 words. You don't say, today everything I write is gonna be perfect. No, you're just trying to have fun. Henry Miller has this list of 11 writing commandments, and out of those 11, 2 of them mention pleasure. Number 3 is work calmly, joyfully, and recklessly on whatever you're working on. And the 8th one was work with pleasure only. I think 2 of his commandments focused on pleasure because I think he realized just how important it is for us as authors just to have fun on the page. Not to put all this pressure on it, but just have fun. The 3rd thing you should do before 8 a.m. is read a page of your model book. Now, what is a model book? A model book is a book that you've selected that bears some kind of similarity to the book that you're trying to write. It could be a similarity in terms of character, could be a similarity in terms of voice, could be a similarity in terms of point of view or tense. But whatever that similarity is, you read a paragraph, and just a paragraph, I'm not talking about like a chapter or something, you read a paragraph of that book because you're trying to force yourself to slip into the zone where you can mimic that voice or point of view or character, whatever, and it helps get you in the mood to write your own book. My only warning on this is please don't procrastinate. It's very easy to start reading the book and just get caught up in it, and all of a sudden you don't have any writing time left. So read a paragraph, read maximum a page, just enough to get you in the mood. Another idea is to read it out loud, which will force you to sort of slow down and actually like really catch the rhythms and musicality of it. And remember that you're not trying to get any sort of special insight, you're just listening to it so you can sort of slip into that style. Lastly, once you've chosen a model book, do not switch it halfway through writing your novel. Keep being inspired by a single source, and I think you'll have a better chance of making your own tone and style throughout your whole novel very consistent. The 4th thing writers should do early in the morning is to pick the right space. Now, by right space, I don't mean perfect space. E.B. White says, a writer who waits for ideal conditions will die without putting a word to paper. So let's look at some examples of this. So Ocean Vuong wrote his first novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, in his closet. Not exactly an ideal space, but it was because his roommates were so loud, the closet was the only place he could hear himself think. John Cheever actually wrote a lot of his works in his building's basement, in the boiler room, right next to the boiler. These are not ideal conditions, but it doesn't matter. It was the space he went to consistently. And Gertrude Stein actually liked to write in her car, in the front seat of what she called Lady Godiva, her Model T Ford. I always write in my office, which is a little shed that's separate from the house. So very early in the morning, I'll walk out the door and I'm clawing away spider webs so they don't wrap around my face, which is such a horrible sensation. But once I get there, it is a space that I know is a place for writing. My body just knows, oh, it's time for writing because you are in this familiar writing space. Quiet, loud doesn't matter. You can have either. Bright, dark doesn't matter. Hot or cold doesn't matter. I have written in over 100 degrees and I've written in -20 degrees. You just make it work. And even ergonomic versus non-ergonomic doesn't matter. Truman Capote actually wrote things while lying down. He would just scribble them on paper. Whatever your special place, just go there as a matter of habit and routine, and your body and brain will understand this is the place and time for me to write now. Now, this next thing to do is very important. Don't skip it. It is number 5. Set a writing goal. It is just something where you write down, today I am going to accomplish X. It could be a certain word count that you're aiming for. It could be a goal to finish this scene you'd been thinking about. It could be just a time goal, like you're gonna write for 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours. Or it could be a very specific goal, like you want to flesh out a scene that you sort of half wrote before and you want to expand it. But my recommendation really is not to set goals for that entire month, but to just set goals for that day. Right then, what is your goal in the next hour? What is your next goal in the next 2 hours? Make it a small writing goal. It doesn't have to be ambitious. In fact, it's probably best if it's not ambitious. Just make it a small writing goal that you can accomplish right now. And I'll also say that, don't beat yourself up if you don't get it. We all have those writing days where something's just not coming. Yes, it's frustrating. But there's always tomorrow. Okay, we have only 2 steps left that writers should take in the morning, and this one is number 6, journal. So I am not saying to write like a whole long journal entry. What I am saying is write maybe a line or 2, and maximum, say a paragraph. You don't want to spend all your writing juice energy on journaling and not on the actual writing. And here are some ideas that you could actually journal about. First, write down any dreams you had, particularly if you think they could be relevant to your book in some way, but also if they're not. It's fun to capture your dreams and they can provide inspiration for future stories. 2, write down any inspiration you got while you were sleeping sleeping or while you were doing whatever your routine was, like taking a walk. This is so you don't get into the writing and then forget that genius idea that you had. 3, write down anything that you're thinking about how to write better today. Maybe you learned something from a television show the night before and you're thinking, oh, you want to use that technique. Just make a quick jot or note of that before you begin writing. Lastly, write down any sort of ideas you have for what happens in this section of the book. I don't outline, that's not my style, but I'll frequently write down a list of bullet points where it's like, okay, I think these 4 things need to happen in this particular scene. And I'll write that down and then I'll write the whole scene. And that's just so I don't forget number 4 before I get to it. Another thing you could do is just ask yourself a brief question about one of your characters. Something like, in this particular scene, what does my character fear the most? Or if you're having a lot of trouble writing a scene, journal for just a paragraph about why you think you do fear writing this scene. What inside of you is resistant to getting this scene on the page? And lastly, another thing that you could do in your journal is simply to write down your goals and to write down the pep talk phrase that you used. All right, now we are to the very final step of things that writers should do in the morning, and I think you probably can guess what this one is. It is number 7, write. Some of you were like, when are we gonna finally get to this part of the video? Okay, well, we're here. This is a video about things writers should do before 8 a.m. and of course it is very good to write in the morning. If you take a look at this survey, you can see a list of some of the most famous writers of all time and then a breakdown of when they did most of their creative work. If you take a look at the red bars, you can see that the vast majority of them worked in the morning. Some of them early morning, some of them late morning, but almost always morning. In fact, only the 4 bottom writers didn't work in the morning. Your goal really in the morning is to get through those stages 1 through 6 pretty quickly so you can spend most of your time on this stage 7, the actual act of writing. And I'm just gonna give you 3 pieces of advice when you get to this stage. 1, allow yourself to write badly. Not everything you have to say, not everything you write you have to publish. If you release the pressure on yourself and say, I'm just gonna do the best that I can today, it creates this great opening for marvelous, wonderful things to happen inside your book. My second piece of advice is don't feel like you have to write in order. If you come to your manuscript and you're struggling with the next sequential scene, skip it. Skip to the next scene that you can see really, really clearly. You can always go back later and figure out what was wrong with that scene that wasn't allowing you to write it. Maybe you need to get a little bit further in the book before you can backtrack and write that early scene. And my third piece of advice is don't allow revision to eat up all your time. It can be really easy when we sit down at the page to just get caught up in reviewing everything we've written before and not do the hard work of generating new stuff. Do the hard work, write new lines, add to your manuscript, and then maybe later on in the day, maybe late morning or afternoon or something, that is the time when you can revisit older material and tinker with it to improve it. I hope all that advice makes your writing mornings much more fruitful, and I hope you get a lot of writing done tomorrow morning.